Hi, this is Scott Bradfield for the City Lit Advanced Creative Writing course. This is the more informal series of lectures we do every midterm. We do a new lecture for the library, and it's the informal season where I wear a sweater instead of a jacket, and I don't have to shave. And my dog is here, and I won't tell you exactly what year I do each lecture, but I intend to be teaching this course for a long time and recirculating some of these lectures. So if I start to get better looking over the next 20 years, there's a reason possibly for that. I want this term we had a duel to the death. Hunger Games meets the Dead Poets Society. I was very disappointed. There was no bloodletting. There was no pain whatsoever. No one died, and it seems that everyone who involved themselves in the arena combat just seemed to make friends and go away. So I was disappointed. But I thought I would try to deal with some of the questions that were raised, and they seem to be based around the notions of what the differences between short stories and novels as a discipline and as a daily activity. I thought I'd just take two stories, two things we use in the class. One of the stories from this anthology that is our regular anthology. I thought we could look at think about just out of random the Tall Tales of the Mekong Delta, if you want to kind of look at something after this lecture. And then we'd think about Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana. Now, first of all, there's a couple of obvious differences between sitting down to write a short story and sitting down to write a novel. Sometimes, I will warn you, you don't know. You may sit down to, in my experience, I have sat down to write a novel and ended up with a short story, and vice versa. I've sat down to write a short story, and the world is started to open up. As I reached what I thought was the end of the story, it opened up into something else, and several of my novels started out as stories. It depends on how much you want to structure your work and you think in advance about how much you're going to do, but at the same time, there is always these surprises in writing fiction, which I think you need to cultivate. You don't want to, as I find most of my students do, over-plan everything and then end up bored to death and feeling like you're going to work every morning. So one of the points that's worth thinking about is that the novel, and I said this on other lectures, I know, when you sit down to write a novel, there's a lot of things you want to know. One of the students this week was mentioning how they feel I start a novel, they run out of steam. It's a very common feeling when you start a novel. This means often it's because you haven't established a lot of things at the beginning that will generate your own interest and your own abilities for a year or two. The novel, you're going to go off for a year or two. And you're going to make a lot more cautious choices with a novel. You're going to base it in a world that you sort of know. Greene knows Havana. He knows travels. He knows these types of towns. He knows the CIA. He's worked for these boring, as for him, the MI5, the British spy business was just a bunch of office people. And he knows that world. He also knows these cities, and he also knows these interests in Catholicism. It's all stuff that he's comfortable with that world. He knows these people, and some of the characters, even Captain Seguro, are characters that show up often in Greene, characters that come to life for him immediately, which is this sort of corrupt but friendly local policeman or corrupt politician who may be kind of a monster, but at the same time, he's charming. And Greene is fascinated by these people, and he's clearly known a number of them, and he rewrites that character very often. So one of the things that helps you to write a novel is you may have a great plan, but if you start a novel and you set it in a world you don't know, okay, then you're going to run out of steam. And if you start a story in which your central character doesn't really act very much or do very much, or have much energy. I see a lot of these types of novels. The character who's kind of bored and everything's happening to them, and they're very passive, and they're depressed, and they're not characters that are really going to run a novel for you. Wormold's not a particularly fascinating man, but once he has a way of making some money, he goes for it. He takes some action immediately as soon as he gets an opportunity. That's a good character, and that's a character that will sustain you through a novel. Look at the Kate Braverman story. Short stories take a different type of sensibility. This is why some people can write just short stories, and some people are more interested in novels. Sorry, there's lighting. I haven't done all my lighting as well as I normally do in these things. Short story writers are a little bit more adventurous. They're a little bit. They can have fun with a story. You can sit down to write a short story and spend a week or 2 weeks on that story, and it can fall apart in your hands, and you don't care really. You start a story with an aardvark on Mars, or as I've done with talking animals, or with an ugly elf or whatever. You come up with some character and an idea, and you sit down and you see if it works on the page. It's a game, it's an experiment, and it's playtime for short stories. And that's what I personally love about short stories, is I can start with a character and a situation. It could be very realistic, it could be very over the top, but I'm not going to ruin my life if I spend 2 weeks and it falls apart. Now I'm going to say, so the short story writers, you can sit down and you can sort of generate these stories and see how they work. On the other hand, look at what you have in a short story when you start the story. Take Kate Braverman's. This is Tales from the Mekong Delta. Okay, she starts writing a short story in a world that Braverman could clearly write a novel about. She knows this world of substance abuse and of workshops, and she knows Los Angeles really well, and she knows these types of people. The passive woman who's kind of waiting for these horrible men to show up, and this big con man, bullshit artist, scary guy who shows up in the parking lot. She knows these characters and can write about them without much difficulty. But when she sets that story up, how many opportunities does she have for a big book? It starts out with 2 characters. He comes to meet her, and we're in her head very deeply. We're not looking outside of anything else. The scene ends between those 2. We never meet her children. We never meet her family. We never meet anybody else in the workshops. Second scene, the 2 people again. Third scene, the 2 people again. Now, once you start to get into the second, third scene of your story, and you just have a couple of characters and you have one central dynamic, then you're going to have a short story probably. I'm not saying you couldn't have carried on Mekong Delta, but the complexity of the story is pretty limited. And the actual turning point of the story, or that moment of crisis, as Brian Moore mentions, which is basically she starts to like him. That moment of crisis is not going to take you into more than 20, 30 pages. And so you're going to end up with a short story. If you want to develop a novel out of that, you need to open it up pretty early. Think about how quickly Green opens up, an experienced novelist and short story writer. He starts off with the same situation. 2 people walking down the street. Conversation. They see that black man walking across the street, and we have a little drama between these 2 men. They know each other, but they stand for 2 different things. A man who enjoys life and has fun, and Wormold who's just trying to get by, who's depressed. He's not a very active man, Wormold, at the beginning of the book. But we're also introduced to some significant characters just in a couple of pages. Millie's important. Millie's not there, but Millie's an important character. Now we've suddenly got one strong relationship and another strong relationship, which is available. That's not enough for a novel. But then within 4 pages, we have Hawthorne shows up at the shop. You don't have a short story anymore. Look how little you need to really bring into the story or the situation. But you have to know that world. Green knows that world. And he's extended that world by just bringing in a significant character. Look at all the other characters that are quickly arise in the book. Millie shows up within the next chapter. Captain Seguro shows up off stage, and then he's slowly coming into the novel. He's a character that's coming, and you've already got a novel. You've got a central character who's acting, who's doing something, and then when you go to London and you have the whole bureaucracy of the MI5, you have a novel, almost whether you like it or not. I want to say one last thing about these 2, very, very different forms, but something similar about both of them. Somebody asked about how you can go back and look at how the whole shape of your novel works. I always come back to the same point with all the stories and novels I read, students' work or books I'm reading, or for review or just for pleasure. You can look at the whole shape of the book for endlessly, and the beginning, middle, and end, and how the structure works. You got to look at those first 2 chapters. I mean, if you pick up Tall Tales of the Mekong Delta, the first two scenes, it's pretty. A lot of people will not like it, but basically, you've got everything working for you in those first two scenes. They're going to take you somewhere. You've got two characters. They're clearly described. They're clearly presented. It's a world outrider knows. That means that's what you want to be looking for. Those opening pages tell you what is possible in your story. You can't go beyond those possibilities, but you can take them in ways and into directions that might be slightly unusual. But the world's already structured in the same way that with Our Man in Havana, in those first few pages, the opportunities for Wormald and the world that Wormald lives in will only allow so many things to happen. That's what's really important about the openings of your stories and novels. If your opening 2-3 chapters are kind of muddy and unclear, and the character's not very clear, and you're hearing people say to you, well, I don't understand what's happening in those opening pages, then the whole shape of the book doesn't matter because people need to get through those first 2-3 chapters. So those are where you need to start thinking about how you start your story, how you start your novel. The novel will tend to be a more conservative jump. You're going to start it somewhere you can spend time on. Every time I've written a novel, I've written a couple that took me places I didn't expect to go, but more often than not, I'll be thinking of a character and a world and an area and a life and an energy that I can kind of plug into every day for a short period of time. But that's about everything I can say. That's all I know today. Misty can say goodbye. Bye-bye, Misty. Okay. Anyway, thank you. These midterm lectures aren't Citizen Kane, but just trying to reply to individual comments each term. Okay. Bye.